Appreciate you waiting. Hosey had me waiting because this is East Coast, West Coast, and we had to get this emergency meeting popping because we got all these people texting us, emailing us, and I wanted to get together some powerful leaders in the elite builders so we can address this head on. In the 18 years I was selling real estate, things changed as far as like how the business is done in terms of technology. This is a fundamental structural change to the business. At the same time, what I'm aware of is that our industry is very, adaptive. I know that with these changes, people who pivot will actually, I think, do better and actually make more money. So the question is just, how are we going to pivot? So for those of you who, I think everybody knows Hosey in the baby blue right now, looking smooth and easy in the baby blue.
I'm wearing cowboy boots. You guys want to see?
Hey, God. Oh, wow. Shows me well, I'm just wearing underwear, bro, so I can't stand up. and then we got the powerful Vicente Arzata, our resident kind of contract specialist. So welcome, guys. I'm excited to hop on this live. I felt it was important as a leader to just kind of address it head on. So I guess the first thing we can start with is that I did a post maybe like 2 months ago where I said, hey, I think with a very high degree of probability here in the perhaps distant future or not so distant future, buyer's agents will have to negotiate a portion, if not all of their fee. And, two things came from this particular settlement, which, by the way, it has to be approved by the judge, hasn't been approved yet. Let's say it does. We'll go with the assumption that it will. There were two main changes that were agreed to. One was that compensation can no longer be put in MLS for a buyer's agent. Now, it did not say you cannot offer compensation to a buyer's agent. It just said that it can't be put in the multiple listing service. And what I'm aware of is for commercial real estate, a lot of transactions are done without the commission being put anywhere. And when somebody makes an offer, they kind of do an LOI, a letter of intent, and in that offer is the purchase sales price and also the professional fee that the buyer's agent is looking to get on that sale, and then it becomes a negotiation. The second rule is that if you do work with buyers, you must have a buyer broker's agreement kind of authorized. I think the goal and objective there is to have upfront conversations in terms of compensation and what that's going to look like. So Vicente, you've been selling real estate longer than me and Jose, probably combined. So talk to me a little bit about your first kind of reaction to those two rule changes.
Thank you, Aaron. This is something that has been going on in the brewing in the back burner for a long time, and technology and changes to the industry are the ones that are causing this. I'm in my third decade as a realtor, so I've seen a lot, especially after the year 2000. You call it that little thing they call the internet. So that brought a lot of changes. And I recall a conversation that we had a couple of years ago where I shared with you that the power shifting on the real estate relationships in the 60s and before, when organized real estate was put together, the power was really in the hands of the brokerage. Then with the birth of the internet, the power shifted to the hands of the agents. But now with Internet 4.0 or higher, the power is shifting to the hands of the consumer. So how do is this change, this Burnett lawsuit and the settlement is going to affect our industry? First, like you say, it's going to be a different conversation between the seller and the listing agent.
A much more, I believe, skilled and professional conversation.
Correct.
Yeah, and I believe that one of the things I wrote down is that buyer's agents up until now have actually never had to come up with a formal presentation, the majority of them, a formal presentation demonstrating what value they bring to the transaction, right? And I think that one of the byproducts of this is that a lot of agents, the vast majority of agents are buyer heavy. 60-70% of their transactions are on the buy side. So a lot of those agents, I think, will perhaps not have the capacity or the bandwidth to make that pivot, right? Or have those skills. I think the ones that do pivot, do have a formal presentation and basically list buyers, will actually make the same, if not perhaps a little bit more, as long as they can demonstrate the fact that they add value to the transaction, and specifically how they add value. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, because for the better part of my career, 25 years, then you sat down with the seller and you had an exclusive agreement for compensation, but majority of the buyers didn't. And the level of a skill, that's something that I've learned from you over the years, that the level of a skill necessary to represent a buyer was not really, Mike Ferry used to call it a glorified door openers. Yeah. And that is going to have to change. That this lawsuit changes that. Well, the skill will get paid.
Well, here's what I wanted to, and this was new to me. I actually didn't know this, but Vicente shared this with me off camera. I think, Vicente, you said that this that has happened has already happened in other countries, meaning that like it's already happened. Did you say in France, or did you say like where has this happened? Because it's funny, because if you look around sometimes, something that maybe appeared new to us may have already happened somewhere else. So like, do you have any insight on where that happened? Any insight on how that works in France or some of these different countries?
It is a great question, Jose Luis. The fact that France is already operating that way, and also Australia is happening, with the transactions have decoupled the compensation from the seller into the buyer's agent. And that's one of my questions. My question is, like, what does this lawsuit does to an already wounded U.S. real estate market?
Yeah,
and that we still have to see.
Well, I think
the actual market.
But I think that there is. I love that we're doing this. By the way, it's so cool to like try and get ideas of believable people. So I think that with a high degree of probability, being that volume has already gone down 19, like depending on geographic area last year, 19 to 30%, depending on where it was, 6 million to 4 million transactions. And let's say the majority of buy sides, I mean, the majority of agents are buy side heavy, 60-70% of their deals are on the buy side. I also think a byproduct of this is over time, let's say over a 5 to 10 year time span, I do think professional fees will come down over time as a result of the decoupling, right? Now, I also think that as a ramification of this, one of the things I wrote down is that teams that are focused on buy side, because what the model has been since the internet, which was the last structural change to the business, right? Because it used to be like nobody had any information about real estate, and real estate agents had a basically a monopoly of information. Well, that got decoupled, that got decentralized, right? Democratized with the internet. And then the model became buy leads and then offer out, you know, and then work the buy side leads, because the majority of those leads are buyers. And that works when you know that you can expect let's say, all commissions are negotiable. We're all aware of that. Let's say a 2 to 3% commission on the buy side. That model functions. When that changes with a very high degree of probability, that has a problem with that model, because I know that the majority of teams don't operate on
just listings,
like really fundamental good economics, where the team lead usually is in production, right? Because they need to be in order to be profitable, and the team itself doesn't actually, they operate on very thin profit margins. So if that revenue drops by a third, that makes that model problematic over time.
Vicente, when there was the MLS book before, did they advertise
hey, I feel like we just went to a cave and we were like, tell us, old man, did you used to use tablets when you
no, and the reason I ask is there was a video by Glenn Sanford today, and he was talking about how before, I think he said something about that the buyer's agent compensation wasn't advertised at some point, or it was on the list. So he said something that I didn't quite understand. Okay. So I kind of wanted to ask the wise Vicente.
And it's a great question. In my experience, my opinion, what I remember is that the buyer's compensation was not advertised. It was not
on the book, in the book
anywhere until the birth of the MLS in the early
until
2000s.
the MLS came about. So
when the MLS came about, then cooperating agreements and share compensation was advertised. Then in the midst of settling this lawsuit, one of the things that NAR and Zillow and Milo and Willow and Truly and Zulia did is they began publishing the buyer's agent's commission as a way to appease this this lawsuit. And now that this settlement changes that. Okay, so another brutal change, Aaron, another brutal change to the market, right? When I started, the MLS changed the market. Zillow changed the market. Now this lawsuit changes the market again.
And I think one of the things I wrote down too is that Zillow's model is very much so in jeopardy as a result, because their model is they take our data, sell it back to us, so agents will make money on the buy side transactions, and they can charge 30-40% referral fees with like Zillow Flex and whatnot. At the same time, though, what I just mentioned in terms of the economics of that no longer makes sense if I don't know that I can expect a 2 to 3% commission on the buy side.
Right. So here is something else, Aaron. CoStar bought homes.com. How much they invest millions and millions of dollars. They had 3 commercials at the Super Bowl, and their model is based on feeding off the agents.
Giving all the leads back to the
consumer. They became the middleman. They get the consumer, and then buyers agents buy these leads, and their model, believe it or not, is based on the agents will not call those leads. So I discovered that these big companies, they sell leads to 5 different agents on the same market, the same leads, and that's how they make tons of money.
Yeah, I think there was a statistic where they sold like something crazy, like, I don't know, like 20 million leads, but there were only like 4 million transactions in the year, right? Or 100 million leads, something crazy like that. Well, so and what homes.com does is that they give all the leads back to the listing agent.
They changed it.
Which I can understand why agents would like that. Now, I'm also curious to see, and then we can talk about kind of strategically some things that people can be doing, right? So first, I think it makes sense. Like, hey, what do I think will be first level consequence, second level consequences, and then as a practicing real estate agent, how do I need to start presenting?
Beautiful,
right? Like, how do I need to start presenting on the listing side? How can I demonstrate value on the buy side, and that sort of thing. So. The other thing that I wrote down here is that smaller brokerages are going to get like hammered. So people who have like 60 agents, like 100 agents or less, like they're going to get hammered because they were already having a hard time from an economic perspective. But if revenue has the potential of going down, they're going to have to, and every brokerage is really like involved in these lawsuits. So they have to spend some sort of resources or time or money to fight them or to pay. And that takes time away and resources for adding value to agents and investing in technology and also not doing mergers and acquisitions. So I think what will happen is they will have to move to models where they can get rid of expenses like cloud-based models, which we are at the E to X. Hey,
EXP.
I believe that will happen too. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I think that you're absolutely right. See, everything is commission based, and one of my mentors said that sells the realtors, we are the piece of meat between the two breads.
Yeah.
So as commissions are under pressure because it's the money that is in the middle.
Jose thought that was funny for some reason. I don't know why. He's such a little kid, bro. You said
heard me say this before.
You said that he between two breads, and he was like, ha 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 ha. Haha.
You didn't think that was funny? Come on.
One of my title reps calls them Vicenteisms. But anyways, moving forward, because the commissions are under fire. I saw this coming a long time ago. And I've always, throughout my career, Jose knows this, I've been extremely fond of buyers because that moral salary that gives you, seeing them put the key on their first home and help them build wealth, and having called me after 20 years and say, I want you to represent my daughter because you help us with this. And that is cool, right? But what happens to the skill? I remember that we used to give guarantees. A client, if I am the consumer, Aaron, and I want representation, I want to see value. Now that I'm gonna have to pay, I have to see value. We had these conversations over and over with listing sellers, where they say, okay, I'm interviewing 3 agents. Where's your value?
That's right.
And so then the ability to represent that value, and then getting the contract.
Yeah, but I think we're assuming that listing agents and sellers aren't going to provide compensation anymore.
No, I agree with you. I think that they will, and I think that they'll do it in one of 2 ways. I think they'll do it either creatively by offering concessions, because you are allowed to offer concessions. Yeah. So let's say you're like, hey, I'm going to offer like a $10,000 closing cost concessions, but that'll help the buyer to pay perhaps a little bit of the buyer's agent's professional fee. I think you can also, as a listing agent, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves in terms of like what you can do, is now we've been talking about this for like a year, like presenting with options. So it's like, listen, we have a few options at our disposal in terms of compensation, and it is a tool that we use to market the property in terms of, exposure, right? Obviously, what we offer out or what we choose to offer out, whether it's a mixture of concessions or perhaps a little bit in terms of the compensation for the buyer's agent, that will increase the probability that we can get more views, which ultimately is going to end up with you netting the most money possible. So we're going to go over the options that you have, and I want you to feel completely comfortable with whatever we end up choosing. You're the boss, and I'll support you 100%. Now you have a menu of options. So a menu on the listing side could be, whatever it is in your geographic area, but let's say it's like, okay, let's say it's 2%. Again, all commissions are negotiable. So let's say it's 2%. And you're like, all right, well, at 2%, this is what you get. You get, kind of the basic stuff, right? Now, let's say it could be 2.5%. At 2.5, we add some things. Maybe we add a Matterport. Maybe we add this, we add that. Then at 3%, it's the full Monty, right? We'll have an appraisal done before we put it on the market. We'll pay for the appraisal. We'll have an inspection done. We'll give you up to $1,000 for whatever comes up in the inspection, plus what you get at the 2.5 and the 2, right? So it's a menu of options.
You build a garden, bees come to you. And what we did is we just did our first gala in Fort Lauderdale. We had 150 of our partners fly in.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and we had like a seminar portion, and then we did a black tie, James Bond gala. Everybody's dressed up. It was dope.
Right.
We filmed the whole thing.
All the girls dressed up. All the guys got to dress up.
And then we're doing this, but just smaller, because I had this awareness. We were sitting at like Build, and I was like, oh, this is a big lunch and learn.
Yeah, it is.
I'm like, I can do this. So
100%.
So I just had that awareness. So we did the gala first.
Good that you got that awareness.
John came out to the first one. Lars came out. They both spoke at the event. And then we're doing a leadership retreat in the Dominican Republic. So I have probably 20 of the leaders come out, and we'll pour into them and teach them, train them, and all that. So
the whole purpose of Build, or even something like this, is for people like John.
Celebrity board.
Yeah.
Right? John and Lars have larger organizations, but smaller than Brent's, right?
Yeah.
The whole purpose is to give it to you guys so that he can do it for people like you that have 200-300 people.
Yeah. It's leadership and duplication. That's what it is. And then the other thing that I've realized is like, so events scale, but so does media.
Oh my God, yeah.
So the interesting thing about media is that the audience compounds.
Yeah.
It gets bigger over time. So like once I realized that, probably when I first did this, I was like, okay, I know that it's important, but I really don't understand it. The same way I know how to like list property in high volume, I don't know how to do the media thing. So I hired, do you know who Ryan Pineda is?
Yes.
Yeah, so I hired him. I paid him 25 grand. Okay. So his content creators for a whole year.
Have you been on his stuff at all?
Yeah. I was on his podcast.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I was just on. I was on Pace Morby's too.
Oh,
and
I know.
And
I've met Jamil a couple of times.
And Pace just agreed to speak to at our next gala. Yeah. So we're blending those worlds. But with hiring Ryan, his content creators were on calls with my content creators for a whole year. So we're just sucking out
everything you can.
Everything we could on how to do it. And we went from...
Dude, I really respect Ryan.
Yeah.
And get it, dude. I love it too because I'm a strong Christian.
Yeah.
So I love that he
brings that to his audience. Dude, at his events, he does a whole, like sermon.
Dude, that's amazing. That's how Brent does it too.
Yeah.
So it's like you can't put really price on the education.
No, it's like, in a way, it's like people come, the money and all that stuff, it might get people's attention. But really what you just said, is what it's really about. Because like I find it interesting when we were sitting at Build and like multiple people are like, yeah, Brent baptized me. That's like,
he baptized me.
Did he really?
Yeah.
That's dope.
Yeah, Maui.
So it's like, yeah, people come initially for the job or like whatever, the money, but it's like, the goal is to get you to that.
100%.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, recruiting for EXP, I'm really good at it. I love doing it, but I'm really good at recruiting for God, and that's what I love doing.
Well, and I told my wife, I'm like, dude, what we're doing is really a ministry. The more we can bring people into our orbit, the more we can pour into them, love on them. You know what I mean?
It's so true, man. Like, there's plenty of people that we have out there, and Brent's done altar calls.
It's dope. Yeah.
Like it's nuts.
Yeah. So we have mastermind groups. I have a Bible study group for people in the organization. So it's like doing all that.
I love that.
Yeah.
Dude, that's the stuff that I respect. Like, I can give it that about when people tell me, like, oh, I make this and that, I do this, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, that's cool.
That's cool.
That's your ego.
Yeah, good for you.
Right? You know what ego stands for?
Yeah.
Edging God out.
That's it.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's not worth it.
No.
What is that scripture that talks about, like, what's the purpose of gaining the world and to lose your soul?
Yeah.
Right? And I love that one.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like, dude, I don't want to sit there and gain all this money and lose my wife and my kids.
No, dude.
And God's favor.
Yeah.
I care less.
Exactly. Like what I tell people is like if I go or talk or I do media or whatever, I'm like, no, it's not me. It comes through me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I feel like that shields you from that thinking where you're like, oh, I'm like, no. Like it comes through me, sort of thing.
People tell me it all the time, like, oh man, what'd you do? You did this to be with Brent and all this. I'm like, dude, I don't know. It was God.
Yeah.
Like, it's all God.
Yeah.
Like, you don't like they all look at it, probably same thing for you, right? It's like, look how much, how big you've grown,
sure.
all this stuff and stuff, dude. That's God.
Yeah.
The day you start thinking like, oh yeah, that's me, that was my power, is you started your demise.
100%. And I think faith shields you from that. And when people used to say that to me, I'd be like, I don't really know what you mean by that. But now, like, I understand what that means.
Right? And it's also, it's one of those two, I didn't understand it until I grew closer and closer to God.
Correct. Well, and we're in the Bible study, we're reading a book called Becoming a King. And it talks about the false self and the true self, where the false self, the center of the false self is itself. Right? And the true self is an ever-growing relationship with God.
Dude, get my number. I want you to text me that book.
Yeah, I will.
I want you to
give
my number.
Yeah. I'll text it to you. It's an amazing book. It's awesome too.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is we went around the group, like, because it happens to be men. I have a calling for that. I don't know why. It just happens. But it was interesting because each man had a story of the false self. And thinking, because the false self tries to convince you that you can get through life without God. And they all had a story of like, yep, I went down this path and and then I moved towards the true self. It was like uniform amongst everyone. And it could have been women, it could have been sex, it could have been drugs, it could have been...
You ever heard of Every Man's Battle?
No.
So it's a really good one, because especially as guys, what I have found as I'm gaining more and more success, I get more and more attention.
Yeah.
Right? And to the point where I'm looking at like, there's certain attention I don't want.
Yeah.
Right? I love my wife. I got 4 kids.
Yeah.
Right? And it talks about lust. It talks about addiction to other stuff.
Yeah.
Right? And it talks about every man's battles, what every man deals with, and how to look at your life differently.
Well, yeah, and what it makes me think about is, because I made a commitment this year where I was going to actually read the Bible in a year. I'd never done that before. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's a 1-year Bible that if you read like 3 or 4 pages every day, you read the whole thing. Gives you old, new, like Psalms and Proverbs. So, but what I thought was interesting is, in my experience, the whole Old Testament is a story of God saying to people, don't worship false idols, and they do, and then they get punished.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing, which is what you're describing. So like, I don't think that we've become less secular. I just think we have different gods, money, fame, like all that stuff, and people worship that, and that's a problem.
Yeah, that's where that book that helped me. I've given that to so many guys.
That's awesome.
Right? You know, because there was a time for me where me and my wife had some issues, right? And we weren't together for a little bit of time, right? And God restored our marriage, and all of it. Right? But at that time, during that time, I had an issue going on, right?
Yeah.
And it was one of those things that I developed in that time frame, and she had her issues, right? But it was one of those that helped heal that side.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's all of us men sit there and deal with our own issues, right? We're still the flesh.
We're weak.
Exactly. I'm like, it's like the feeling of like battling daily.
Yeah.
Right? Where I was like, dude, I'm just the flesh, man. I need you so that I don't mess things up.
That's right. That's right.
Because through you, I can do all things.
That's right.
Right? By myself, I will mess this up in a heartbeat.
That's awesome. So when I text you that book, text me that one.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
I'm go.
Appreciate you, bro. It was great talking. Hey, are we going to get Papa Vicente joining us today or what?
Perhaps he may join in, and if he does, we'll be ready to go when he does.
I got a comment on YouTube from the last one. They're like, hey, you know, Vicente added a little bit of flavor to the mix. I'm like, all right, cool. Well, let's get him back on. You know, we had these rule changes. Me and you know, when stuff gets interesting, leaders stand up and everything rises and falls on leadership, right? So as leaders in the Elite Builders organization, me and you started to have conversations. Last weekend, we did a live stream on it. I did a live stream on Monday. I got all the team together. We had 80 agents on a call, having a conversation about how we got here, what are the actual rule changes, and then specifically what we need to be augmenting in terms of approach, right? Both on the seller side and the buyer side. And I know me and you really pride ourselves on giving people the good shit, not the bullshit, and giving them actual tangible tools that they can use right in the marketplace. So let's kind of have a conversation first so everybody has clarity around the 5 different actual proposed rule changes, because they haven't actually gone into effect yet. We're going to operate under the assumption that they are going to go into effect. So let's talk about those 5 different rule changes. Then we can talk about specifically what we need to do as far as augmenting kind of approach, or what we're doing both on the sell side and on the buy side. Because I believe that for those who can pivot, who are highly skilled, they will continue to get their unfair share and continue to make, you know, a meaningful amount of money. The first proposed rule change is that we can no longer put compensation in the multiple listing service. And what was interesting, Jose, I was having a conversation with a coaching client of mine who does both residential and commercial. And he's like, yeah, dude, on all my commercial deals, I have to call the listing agent, find out what they're offering compensation. Then I do an LOI, a letter of intent. And in there, I include the compensation that I want. So I'm like, okay, so explain to me how this is different. He's like, it's not. It's the exact same thing. So we can still offer compensation. We just can't put it there.
Not only that, but I've already actually, like, for some reason, I thought like, hey, this is likely not going to start coming up. I've actually had 2 conversations about it already in the last 2 days. So it actually came up with 2 different sellers, and both of the sellers were like, yeah, we want to offer compensation to the other side, because if not, nobody's going to want to show the listing. And it was just like, it was very well received, basically. So I think in some cases, and this is not to talk down on it, but I think we're making a bigger deal about it than it actually is.
I agree. 100%. And because I know that we're emotional beings so we think that we're thinking beings that feel when we're really feeling beings that think.
Yeah.
And the only reason why people would be kind of scared here is 2 reasons. One is knowledge equals confidence and ignorance equals fear. If I'm unclear on what's actually happening, I understand how you could, you know, be afraid. The second is that you're afraid that the marketplace is going to reveal that you don't add that much value. So that's the second reason why someone, you know, would have fear. So it's come up for you. You've had conversations, been very well received, and we're going to go through very specifically how that conversation goes, right? Yeah. So you can, instead of defending which I think a lot of agents are doing. I'm seeing a lot of emotional posts of defending, like, I'm worth it, and, you know, this and that. Instead, what we should be doing is explaining and teaching the economics of the situation, and also the advantages and disadvantages of offering out compensation, right?
Yeah.
So we'll go over that, and then we'll go over kind of, you know, listing buyers, because that's one of the rule changes as well. Another rule change is that they're going to eliminate all the fields in the multiple listing service that allow you to put some form of compensation, because us as agents, we are very crafty. Okay. We have a lot of, you know, ingenuity, and we will figure out a way around it. So they're just going to remove all fields in the multiple listing service where you can put that. The number 3 change is that we can put concessions in the multiple listing service. So in the broker's remarks, we could say, hey, with an acceptable offer, with an agreed, and again, we're not attorneys. We're just kind of, you know, on the fly, having done a bunch of transactions, probably 3,000 between me and Jose and counting. You know, with an acceptable offer, the seller agrees to provide a concession and then just be quiet. You know, me and you had a conversation about, you know, being very cautious or specific with regards to that language, so that way it doesn't cause confusion or something of that nature. The fourth thing is,
and I think concession is the right word as well too. I also think that if basically listing agents take that approach where they just add that in the private remarks, it signifies to the other agents saying, oh, like, this is a listing that's actually providing compensation, which if they are providing compensation, very little changes basically from, it's still the same thing. Like, you're submitting what you can text the listing agent, ask what they're paying out on this one, and submit an offer on it, and you'll get paid that same amount basically.
Yeah. Easy peasy. So that's that 4th rule change. And then the 5th, oh, excuse me, I think that's the 3rd. The 4th rule change is that a seller can still offer compensation. You can. You're just not allowed to put it in multiple listing service. So you can.
They can still offer compensation?
Oh my God, yes, they can. I don't know if anybody knows this shit, but they can still offer compensation. Okay? And we just aren't able to put it in MLS. So, you know, where we could put it is when, you know, agents call and talk to us or our staff, we can let them know. We can also have a separate landing page with information about the property. It's just not in our listing service on our own company listings, because the broker is really the one that owns the listing. On your kind of company website, you can put compensation. The only place you can't put it is in the multiple listing service. Okay.
Or even like what you said, like, seller can, or what you said, with an acceptable offer, seller agrees to provide a concession, text for details.
Yeah, that's it. And they can text the staff, and then we just text them back and let them know what it is.
2%. Yeah, let them know what it is right there.
Hey, did you guys see that face Jose just did? That was so cool. He was like,
that's so simple. It's like,
it's so simple. Like, we're making this out to be this huge thing. Now, the last rule is that if you work with a buyer, you're going to have a buyer broker's agreement signed. Now, what I find really interesting about this one, Jose, is I've been asking, you know, agents, you know, throughout this week as we're having all these conversations, which are dominated by this kind of quelling people's concerns and kind of anxiousness or tension, is, let me ask you a question. Would you ever take a listing without a listing agreement? And they're like, of course not. Like, it's the most ridiculous thing that they could, you know, somebody could possibly say. And I'm like, well, why? Because it's mandatory. So the only reason that we have not been getting buyer broker's agreements signed is because it wasn't mandatory. Now it'll be mandatory. So just like when you go on a listing presentation, you go over, you have a formal presentation, hopefully you're not winging it. You know, demonstrate the value that you're going to add in your products and services, and then you let them know what the professional fee is, and then you negotiate, right? Well, this is no different. You're just going to have to do it on the buy side. Okay. So those are the 5 rule changes, proposed rule changes, because remember, has to go into effect in July. And I know if we look at all the media from agents, a lot of it is emotional. It's not actually logical and rational. If you look at kind of the formal media, a lot of it is uninformed, where they're like, that's it. There's no more 6%. I'm like, hey guys, just so you guys are clear, right now, without these rule changes, somebody in my market's doing a flat fee listing. Somebody in my market lists for 1%. Somebody in the market is running around telling people they'll do it at a discount fee. Like,
somebody took a 6% listing as well too.
Exactly. So there's always options. And you know what I've been telling people, Jose? It's like, hey, when you go on a plane, do you have options and choices? It's like, well, what do you mean? Well, you could sit in the back and you could pay the cheapest amount, correct? Yeah. Or you could get an aisle seat. It's a few more bucks. Or you could sit in one of those seats that are close to the exit so you have more legroom. Or you can sit up front. Nobody freaks out about that. Everybody is very clear, right? And then you know what I said to somebody, Jose? I was like, hey, tell me this. Have you ever been on a plane and first class hasn't been full? And they were like, no. I'm like, even though they have the cheaper seats in the back? Yeah. Why? Because some people don't want to sit back there and they're willing to pay more money to sit up front. Okay.
Yeah. The other thing I think as real estate agents, we have to remember that it's not the strongest, the smartest real estate agents that survive, or not that survive, that thrive. It's the ones that are able to adapt. So through our industry, there's been very few top producers that basically produce in every single market. The top producers that produce in every single market are the ones that are able to adapt. So like, for example, during the bank REO, foreclosure REO days, some of the top producers got an REO account, others didn't. When the REO accounts ran out, the top producers switched to traditional buyers and sellers, and some of them didn't. And you notice that trend. So it's not really like change happening. To be very transparent, I remember when COVID hit and in Ventura County, they put a stipulation that you couldn't show property. So imagine selling a property where you could not show property. So I remember at that point, I'm like, look, if the market's going to crash, I'm not going down with it. And that forced creativity. And it's mainly like just changing strategies and having the right attitude and mindset towards it. So at that point, right before that, we had bought a 3D tour camera. We're like, hey, look, if we're not allowed to show the property, we're basically making all of our showings via 3D tour for that period of 2 to 3 weeks where we were not essential workers. To me, that was more scary than something like this, because I was like, oh my God, if you can't show properties, how are you going to be able to do it? Yet people adapted. People adapted to those times. Hey, some clients didn't want to meet, you adapted to Zoom. So it's just about adaptation. And today we're going to be giving you whatever we feel would be the right skills to be able to adapt to that. That's all exactly it is.
That's all it is. And what I'm aware of is if you want to be in business, okay, business is an infinite game. It is not finite, meaning that it is constantly evolving and constantly changing. If you want to play for an extended period of time, I have to be willing and able to constantly be changing and adapting to my external circumstances and innovate as things change. So a perfect example, just like Jose was saying, when he went through that in 2020 to 2021, I was selling real estate in 2006 and 2008. The financial collapse happens, explosion of REOs, foreclosure short sales. I chose not to participate in that. Also an explosion of expireds. I grew my business up to 100 transactions a year. But then what happened is the marketplace got good. And what happens to expireds? They shrink. I had to pivot. I pivoted to a different source, which was probates and estates. That became 50% of my business, went all the way up to 200 deals. Then what happens is these online lead providers become a thing. And then we did a bunch of transactions with them. So it's constantly pivoting and adapting to external circumstances, right? And I think that things are changing in our current kind of world and society, just in general, so fast with technology and everything, that there's two skills that are really, really valuable. Number one is the ability to learn things very, very quickly, or proximity to people who can learn them very quickly. And then number two, a willingness to change your mind. Because money has an addictive quality. So because of it, we get addicted to the way that we receive it. So we get so like, oh man, like this is the way that I receive money. So anything that's perceived to be a change is a threat to that security. When in fact, your real security comes from trusting yourself that you'll figure it out. Right? Yeah. And by adapting. So all of this is good. We're clear on the everybody clear on the changes? Everybody clear on the changes here? Everybody? Okay, good. So now what we're going to do is now we're going to have a conversation about specifically how you need to be augmenting what you're saying and your approach, because I want you guys to be clear. This business, what we do doesn't change based on external circumstances. How we do it and at how much of it we do it is what changes. So in other words, when the marketplace is great, I maybe only need to make, 10, 12 contacts a day, 15 contacts a day to hit my goals and objectives. When it's not great, the volume's going to have to change. So what I do doesn't change, but how much of it I do and how I do it changes. So if the marketplace is rising very fast and quick, how I present price is going to be different in a marketplace that's stagnant or going in the other direction. Okay. So what this conversation is going to be about, you're still going to present. How you present is what needs to be augmented or evolved. Okay.
So the way that it's come up for me, if we just start off with the no compensation on the MLS, I've been on 2 listing appointments, and the sellers have said, hey, I heard about this thing, like this change or this lawsuit. Can you tell me a little bit about that, basically? And the way that I responded was simply just, okay, so that is a really good question. There was a change so the way that, let me retract. So the MLS no longer allows us to offer buyer compensation on the MLS. That doesn't mean that you can't offer out a buyer's commission. It just means that we're no longer allowed to advertise. Now, in our conversations in the past, as I've mentioned to you, our commission is 100% negotiable. We've always been transparent about that. Basically, we're just no longer allowed to market on the MLS. We could still offer compensation, basically.
What's going on, Hosey? No, bro, you're looking a little slims, bro. You've been fasting, and I didn't eat all that. I'm just saying you look like a little slimmy. You know what I mean?
Thank you, man. I appreciate the compliment. Hey, who do you think you are having me waiting for you? You know, like it's.
Hey.
Don't you know who I am, bro? You're like 3 minutes already, man. Come on.
Yeah. It's all good. So, how you doing, bro? You doing all right?
Good. Yeah, good.
Yeah. It's out there selling homes. You know what I mean? Taking $9 million listings. You told me. Way to go, champion.
Yeah, that's the first 9 milli that I take. So this year we have a 5 million and a 5.5 coming up. So
good for you. Good for you. So today we are gathering to have a conversation about doing 100 deals in a calendar year. I've done that. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years in a row. You've had the good fortune of doing that. I think more than once.
I want to clarify. Personally, I've only gone probably to about like 80 homes a year. Yeah. Personally. Yeah, with a team, I've gone to 110, and I think max was 120, basically. So we hover as a team anywhere from 100. So just a little quick clarification there for me.
Yeah. I've done more than 100, but like, you know, it's all
you have. Yeah.
Like who's counting?
I've only done 80. Only, you know,
only a light 80, just like a light 80 million in volume, whatever it is. Yeah. So, you know, we've both sold real estate in high volume, and you know what I'm aware of is like doing 100 deals for a lot of people is like this. It's like a holy grail. You know what I'm saying? If you could do 100 deals in a calendar year, it's like winning the Super Bowl. You know, for being a real estate agent, and if you could do it consistently over an extended period of time, it's just demonstrated excellence, right? And what I'm also aware of is there has to be a system behind it. Wherever you see you know, results over an extended period of time, there's a system behind it. So, you know, what could be helpful or useful is me and you just kind of going through in our minds, I don't know, 4 or 5 things that if somebody wants to do 100 deals in a calendar year, what mental maps would they need? What kind of tactical approaches would they need? What would be their main sources of business? Where should they be stacking time? What skills so they should be focusing on? Just really like a blueprint as far as what it would take.
100%. And I'm on board for that 100%. Now, keep in mind that the blueprint that we're going to give you is not, it's something that is duplicatable because you're basically taking the ideas of 2 people that have sold listings in high volumes, and we're giving you the mental map to do so. It's not like, hey, look, I have a TV show on TV and you can't duplicate it. Or it's not like, hey, I am a 13 out of 10 in terms of hotness, like that you can't duplicate.
Hey, bro, are you a 13 out of 10 in terms of hotness, bro?
No, but I'm just saying that there are some things that you like. you can't duplicate. And sometimes you see like somebody who maybe like selling Sunset. Like I looked at their production before they had the TV show and looked at their production after they had the TV show. Production is completely different.
Sure. Yeah, and I remember being at a like speaking at a Hispanic Association of Realtors, and you know, I spoke, so you know, I like tear the house down, and then everybody afterwards like, yeah, like what Aaron said, right? And but this woman stood up, and she was on like Millionaire Real Estate Agent Miami, again, 13 out of 10 like model, and she's like, well, you know, you got to build a personal brand, and I'm in the back, I'm like, this fucking. I wanted to raise my hand and be like, excuse me, ma'am. It's like, yes. How many people in this room look like you? It's like 0. How many people will have the probability of getting on TV like you did? 0. So essentially what you're sharing with them like really won't help them that much, right?
Because it's very hard to duplicate. Now, if you have the opportunity to get on a TV show, by all means do it. If you are a 13 out of 10, by all means use that. We're not saying don't do it, you know? Unfortunately, I didn't have the TV show, or I didn't go after the TV show. And unfortunately, I'm not a 13 out of 10. I'm probably a good 10 out of 10.
Dang, you know? Bro. Wow. Hey, it's getting spicy today, bro. Self-assessing at high levels, huh? So yeah, and what we did,
agree with that, comment down below if you agree with it. And if you disagree, comment down below as well too.
There you go. So, and what we both did is we both gravitated towards something that was actually like duplicatable, meaning that it was independent of physical appearance. It was independent of the amount of attention that we had on platforms, whether it was, you know, television or media now, which we both are in that world. And we know that it's predictable, duplicatable. I also know that it can be taught, because when I first met you, you weren't doing too many transactions. And after spending, you know, some time together and really working on your craft, you know, you started to list property in high volume, independent of those other 2 factors we mentioned. So I know that it is something that can be taught, and it's a skill. It just implies practice. So let's first begin with a mental map. As far as if you want to go down this path of having a goal of doing 100 transactions, which, by the way, you want to set goals based on the person that you will have to become in order to accomplish them. Because if you think like doing 100 deals is going to drastically change your life in some way, I promise you, nobody at Dunkin' Donuts is going to be like, oh my God, here's Jose. He did 100 deals this year. Like the guy you cut off is still going to flick you the bird. You know what I'm saying? Like not that much is going to change. What will change, though, is who you are as an individual. And that's actually really valuable, right? Because nobody can take that away from you. So if you want to set that goal, I think the first mental map that you have to get really clear on is that it's going to come from listings. And I know that that's like really
period,
difficult.
End of story.
Yeah, like period, end of story. And I know that that's really difficult for people to, you know, accept or acknowledge. I just know that it's a fact. Is that if you're going to go from, you know, 10, 15, 20 deals and go to 100, it's primarily going to come from listing property, like 80% of it, right? And in order to do 100 transactions, you know, if you have a well-oiled machine in the sense that you have like administrative staff, like listing coordinators, transaction coordinators, and then you refine the skill of being able to, you know, make outbound calls or knock on doors or things of that nature, and set appointments, pre-qualify those appointments, that sort of thing. You can just throw it over your shoulder and keep going. But the main mental map that people need to get clear on is that it's going to come from listings.
And just to piggyback on that, I did a presentation for EXP recently. And part of that presentation was I looked up the top 10 agents in our market who does the most units. And I looked up by who does the most volume. By who does the most volume, 10 out of 10 were primarily listing agents, meaning more than 50% of their business came from listings sold. On the unit side, 9 out of 10 were primarily listing agents, meaning more than 50% of their business came from listings sold. And not to brag, but I was the #1 seller's agent in the entire Ventura County for the last 5 years in terms of units sold. And I was ahead by about 100 units let's not get into that. But 94%,
like it wasn't even close, essentially, is what you're saying, right?
But 94% of the business that I do is listing sold. And the reason is that it's a lot easier to manage 10 listings than it is to manage 10 buyers.
100%. And it's much more effective and efficient. It's more leveraged. So if the goal and objective, the first mental map that you got to get clear on is that if you want to set a goal of doing 100 transactions in a calendar year, you have to be heavy on listings. Like there's no way
if and buts
about it, right? And success leaves clues. So when Jose pulled those numbers, he could see, yeah, those that do the most volume have the most listings, right? There's a reason why 80% of agents, I'd say 70 to 80% are very buyer heavy. The reason is because there's not that much rejection, and truthfully, it's not that skilled of an activity. It's much more, requires much more skill, requires much more of a, you know, kind of competitive, aggressive in a way, kind of disposition to play in the arena of listings, right? Where, you know, you may be competing with 3, 4, 5 other people versus just like, hey, you want me to open up the door? Like there's not that much resistance there, right? So that's the first mental map. The second thing that I think is critical is that there's two groups of people. If you want to get to 100 transactions, okay, there's two groups of people. There's people that you know and people that you don't know. The question is which one's bigger? It's the ones that I don't. So I want you to really hear, I'm not saying not to work with past client centers of influence. What I am saying is if you want to get to 100, you have to get very, very good at speaking to the group that you don't know. And that comes with nauseating, disgusting amounts of role play and practice, right? When I first met Jose, he went on like 100 appointments and took like 20 listings or something crazy like that. Like it was a very small number. And it's because he was working with buyers previously. He didn't have the skill set of being able to work with sellers in high volume, didn't know what to say, how to say it, didn't know how to close, didn't know how to do those things. We spent a lot of time together. And then he went from doing that, having to go on appointments twice to get listings, only having a 25% closing ratio to having like an 80 to 90% closing ratio. And his amount of listing inventory jumped dramatically from listing 20 homes in a year to like 50 to like 70.
Yeah. So I think what you're referring to is just looking at this as a skill set and being like, okay, so when I started off as an agent, I didn't have the skill set of becoming a top listing agent. Now, like, let's say I'm learning social media, it's a skill set that you have to learn. So the good news is it's not something that I possessed, but it's a skill that you can learn. It was funny because I was listening to a podcast today and the guy said that Michael Jordan was so fanatical about practicing that he would rather miss a game than to miss practice.
Yeah. And
I was like, that's unbelievable. You know, it talked about like a Kanye West too. One of his first albums, College Dropout, on one of his songs, he says like, spend 3 summers locked in a room, like basically producing 5 beats a day or something like that. So meaning like practicing. And this idea of like that the skills are a skill set and that you could actually learn this skill set to be more efficient is actually something that can help you. I have an agent right now that she's making the phone calls, but I could just see the conversations that she's having. And it's almost like she's losing money, not losing money, but the business is just kind of like going through her fingertips because she has no idea what to say and how to say it because she's not practicing, basically.
Yeah, agreed. So two separate things. One, you'll notice that when Jose first started in the business, just like me, he was being told all these different things. He didn't have the mental map of it's going to come from listings. Then once he realized it was going to come from listings, he needed to obtain the specialized knowledge on how to take listings in high volume, which includes how to prospect, which includes what to say and how to say it to set appointments, which includes how to pre-qualify those appointments, which includes going and presenting, which includes handling objections and closing, right? And then, you know, if need be, getting a price adjustment. All of those are skilled conversations that take an extended period of time to really get good at. Now, if you want to speed it up, you just put more time and energy effort in, right? So I role play twice a day, 6 days a week for 3 years. that will speed up the learning curve. You see, it's easier to start things. It's very difficult to finish them. Most people are really good at starting things, and they get really excited. They have what you could call like uninformed optimism. They see somebody like Jose or me doing all these deals and like, oh man, this is fantastic. People making all this money. Like, this is great. Then they get in it and they start to do it. And then they end up with informed pessimism, which is, oh, this is a lot harder than I thought it was. Jose makes it look easy. Aaron makes it look easy. This is a lot harder than I thought it was. And then they end up in what would call like the valley of despair, which is like, I don't know, maybe this isn't for me. And then you know what most people do there? They find something else to get excited about. So they're like, oh, this isn't for me. I need to go do this other lead gen mechanism. I'm going to try to do pay per click, or I'm going to try to do this, or I'm going to try to do that. Or what agents do often too is they switch companies. Oh, you know what? It must be the company. Like, that's the problem. And they switch companies. So they can get they have uninformed optimism again. Oh, like they get all excited. And then they go through the same cycle and they never actually accomplish anything, or very little, like mediocre results. So if you're going to go down this path, like, you need to be a finisher. It's not going to be easy. And I'm glad it's not, because if it was easy, everybody would do it. If it was easy, the pay would drop dramatically. If you could watch one YouTube video and become a master salesperson over the course of a weekend, then everybody would do it and the pay would drop dramatically. So I'm glad it's difficult, right? And it's just understanding that A, it's going to come from listings. B, being able to list property in high volume is a skill set. And as such, I have to be willing to put in the time, the energy, and effort to acquire that skill set, and it requires me to finish because it's going to take a while. It's not going to take like 3 months, 6 months. I mean, I remember role playing with you, Jose, and after 6 months, you finally called me and was like, I think I kind of understand what we're doing here. Like, just to like understand the process underneath.
And when it clicked, it was like, oh my goodness. It's funny because one of our agents is having that same realization. She just took 3 listings, I'd probably say in the last 45 days. And it's starting to click for her, you know? But here's what I would say. And this was an exercise that Lars did at our gala. He said,
oh, you mean the gala where we had 150 people fly in?
Yeah.
From all around the country? That gala?
Yeah, which is awesome. But what Lars did, and I thought that this was brilliant, he said, okay, what amount of money do you make right now on a yearly basis, net after expenses? And then how many hours are you putting into the business? Mm-hmm. And then it calculates your hourly rate, basically. And then what he said is, if you want to make more per hour, you got to delegate the things that are lower in terms of hourly pay. Sure. So what I would say is that as a top listing agent, you got to focus on prospecting, lead follow-ups, appointments, and negotiating contracts. Basically 80% of your time should be spent on that. So if you followed me around for a day and you came to my office, you would notice that most of my day is spent on prospecting or lead follow-up or going on appointments. Everything else has been delegated. Now, a lot of people are like, well, when I start making a lot of money, then I'll start delegating things. It actually doesn't work that way. It actually is backwards. Once you start delegating, you'll start making a lot more money because you'll start to be like, okay, like I delegated all the lower income producing activities. What do I do with my time now?
Yeah.
You only have 4 options at that point.
Exactly. So that's another mental map, which is that what gets in the way of delegation for most people is just scarcity mindset and being cheap. Because 65% of us grew up in families that live paycheck to paycheck. That was my experience. And you would hear things like money doesn't grow on trees. Eat all the food on your
table.
plate.
I think I listened to that one.
Yeah, you did, bro. A penny saved is a penny earned, which is bullshit because it's just a penny. Or if you want to get something done right, you need to do it yourself, which is terrible advice. So the challenge is like this accurate assessment of reality, which is what Lars was sharing with people, is that your dollar amount per dollar activity of prospect, lead follow-up, going appointments, negotiate deals as an agent can be upwards of $500 to $1,000 an hour just to be doing those activities. Anything less than that, you should be paying somebody else to do, right? So the listing coordinating, transaction coordinating, you know, people meeting people at homes with the photographer. I'm like, why are you a professional photographer? Like, why the hell are you there? Or meeting people with inspections and like all of these other stuff. So that's another mental map, which is that I only get paid to do 4 things: prospect, lead, follow up, go on appointments, negotiate deals. Everything else should be delegated away from you. And that can be a challenge for a lot of people because they feel the need to hover over things because they're afraid that if they don't, they'll fall apart. And that's just not true.
And keep this in mind. If you ever want to get to $400 to $500 per hour, you're never going to do that by focusing on activities that are $20 an hour. You're never going to do that if you focus on activities that are $30 an hour. So if you look at everything that happens on a listing, from putting up a for sale sign, to taking pictures, to inputting it on the MLS, to coordinating showings. Like, coordinating showings is not a $500 an hour activity. So you have to find, if you find yourself doing some of these activities, it's like, okay, what do I need to delegate to be able to focus on the 4 things: the prospecting, lead, follow-up, appointments, and negotiating contracts. And by negotiating contracts, we don't mean negotiating requests for repairs. What we mean is negotiating offers to get accepted, basically, meaning negotiating new escrows. We don't mean like, hey, look, once it's an escrow, that is a lower dollar an hour activity. That's something that you can delegate for $20, $25 an hour, or you can even delegate it on a per transaction type of file situation.
Yeah, agreed. And then this leads to the next kind of, and it's interesting because we didn't talk about this prior to, just the fact that we have done this, so we know kind of what's required in order to accomplish it, and the mental maps. And the majority of them are thinking. And I want everybody who's watching or who will watch the replay and everything, is that one of the best things you can get from somebody who's just a little bit further down the path. I don't even like to use the word coach, or like, you know, just somebody who's a little bit further down the path, is access to the way that they think, because the way that they think allows them to do what they do. Okay. Another mental map that you're going to have to really get clear on and wrap your head around is that you need to structure things to where you're not the linchpin. So what most people do is they make themselves the center of everything. So it's their phone number on the yard signs. It's their phone number in the MLS system, right?
We only need 12% to make this company go. You guys know we revenue shared $202 million last year. Does everybody know that number? $202 million. It's not really far out to think that we're going to revenue share over the next 4 years $1